It is Tuesday, the 9th of October, and this is The Drill. Thank you. And this is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America, because I'm the only one that makes the presumption for the status quo. So the question then, I think, is the obvious question. I've touched on this, but I want to cover it again, is why is it that I'm the only true conservative, and why is it that true conservatism is about the status quo? And because when you're getting down to fundamental issues, being a conservative is about being realistic. I noticed that was the case with socialism, for instance. When you look at socialism, what is it that socialism is about? It's about idealism. Its interest is in creating an ideal society, the ideal social society. And so when you look at things that way, therefore opposing socialism is about being not idealistic but realistic. And realism is about starting any argument, any debate, and all of politics is basically nothing but argument or debate. But you start it by making the presumption for the status quo, and changing only when there's a prima facie case for change, and using logic and reasoning in order to persuade people that things need to change, and that they need to change the way you think they should change. So there's not only socialism it occurred to me when I was looking at this situation, when you're dividing things up into idealism and realism, that it's not only socialists that are idealistic. It is also libertarians, and it is also objectivists. It is also some conservatives. That's why I make the distinction between true conservatives and false conservatives. There are those conservatives that are actually closer to being socialists than they are to being a conservative, they're more on the left than they are on the right, because they make the presumption for change. They look around and they say, yes, this is a society, a government, a country that needs to be fundamentally transformed, i.e. revolutionized. But instead of having a perfect social order at the end of the rainbow, these conservatives, or so-called conservatives, are looking for usually a Christian, the perfect Christian society. They want to create a perfect Christian society, ideal Christian society. And if you look at the libertarians, they want a perfect liberty-based society, and the objectivists want a perfectly objective society as well. But they're all idealistic, and all basically closer to the left than they are to the right, because making the presumption for the status quo is realistic, and it's realistic because it comports with metaphysics, it comports with reality. The reality is you cannot you cannot assume the case for change, because you cannot prove a negative. If I come out and I say, why not? A lot of our laws that we have today are based on, have come about because they've been bullied on people. And that's what basically, when you're asking somebody to make the presumption for change, to prove a negative, you're bullying them, you're intimidating them, using psychology. You're not being persuasive at all. And that's the other thing, is that with the left, they use force because they have no other choice. If you're going to start by making the presumption for change, you really have no other choice but to use force, because you can't use logic or reasoning in your arguments, because you're not starting from a logical or reasonable, rational or realistic place. So you cannot be civilized. You cannot approach the need or the need for change in a civilized manner. You have to use brute force. Because anybody that's idealistic has, particularly politically idealistic, has two options. They can use brute force to meet their aims or become politically irrelevant. Okay, that's why very few people are libertarians. Very few people are objectivist because they contradict themselves. They are the first ones to say no initiation of the use of force. But since they're idealistic, what they're looking for is an ideal society. There is only, and therefore they cannot be rational, reasonable, or realistic. They're not starting from that basis of making the presumption for the status quo. Then they are going to have, again, to use force in order to achieve their aims. Since they renounce the use of force, that only leaves them in political oblivion. They become irrelevant, political nothing. And so they are. Libertarians matter maybe every once in a while, every few years or so, or few decades, they matter on the margins. But mainly they matter not at all. They are completely irrelevant. So, and again, it's contradictory. Objectivism, of course, is contradictory. As I have explained, as soon as Ayn Rand came up with the quote-unquote philosophy of objectivism, she ceased to be objective. Okay? That's what she should have done. Instead of valuing her personal philosophy, she should have valued something that's realistic, and that is objectivity. Okay, but she erred, she strayed, and for that she pays the price. She becomes her ideas, unfortunately, because she's a brilliant woman and she had a lot of brilliant things to say, but because she couched them all in her personal philosophy of objectivism, then a lot of what she says gets ignored and gets doesn't get very much, is devalued because of that. So today I'm going to be reading from Rush Limbaugh's app from it is going to be a segment from his show from yesterday called the Kavanaugh Weekend. And there's some interesting things in there that I want to go ahead and point out. And after that, then I want to get back to the 10 books that screwed up the world. Because we're getting into, I believe it is Descartes, Discourse on Method, I think it is. And the author, Wiker, and I have a fundamental disagreement about why it is that Descartes sucks, for lack of a better term. So when we get, we'll get to that, though. And now we'll just go ahead. I was going to say maybe some jokes, but not today. Okay, I'll be back in a minute. Thank you very much. Thank you. And Rush Limbaugh. So in keeping with the theme of my monologue, Rush Limbaugh is a faux conservative, and he's a faux conservative because, again, he has a tendency, as much as the left, to make the presumption for change, to look around the United States and not say, wow, this is basically a great country, and I love this country, and I don't see all that much that needs to change here, except maybe a few obvious things. He doesn't. He goes ahead and says, oh, well, it would be a good country if only we didn't have, say, abortion, as an example. And there's other things that, again, he wants to change or get rid of. Part of that is that he's set up, and all people on the right are set up to fail, because we've been brainwashed into believing that where people stand politically is where they stand on the issues rather than on where they stand on change. Okay, and the issues are all set up to favor the left in this country. So, and by taking a stand on the issues, you end up becoming just as idealistic as the left is. You become just as change-oriented as the left. Okay, so and that's so you end up spending all day, every day, trying to justify change and trying to put your opponents in the same trick box that they're putting you in, namely prove a negative. So, and Rush Limbaugh does that constantly. He doesn't realize he's doing that in part because he doesn't learn. He doesn't learn because he believes all knowledge is innate and not acquired. So, but that's a subject for a different time. In any case, yesterday, Rush Limbaugh was going ahead and kind of dissecting the Kavanaugh hearings, and because Judge Kavanaugh got confirmed for Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. So the title of this segment is called Kavanaugh Weekend Deranged Democrats on Full Display for America to See. Rush, hey, how is everybody? Everybody doing okay out there? What a great weekend, eh? Everybody go out there and celebrate by having a beer in Justice Kavanaugh's honor? I certainly hope so. No, not in a solo cup, but right out of the can or right out of the bottle. You don't pour beer in a solo cup. Greetings, my friends, and welcome. Here we are ready, willing, and able to kick off yet another brand new weekend of broadcast excellence. Our telephone number, if you want to be on the program, 800-282-2882. What do you bet after this brouhaha? This vote ended up being 50-48. What do you bet after all this brouhaha, after all the angst, after all the character and life assassination that Democrats tried on Kavanaugh, what do you bet that the vote would have turned out exactly the same regardless what the Democrats did? The Democrats didn't sway one vote. They gave it everything they had, but they did not sway one vote. Murkowski, at the end of the day, ended up canceling out her no vote by pairing her present with Senator Daines, who couldn't be there because of his daughter's marriage. I mean, all of this, and the vote was not, I could make the case that the vote would have been probably the same. It would have been along party lines, and none of that had any effect on the outcome. But it did have an impact on much else. And as we get into the program today, going to be examining some impacts on the activities of the Democrats. So I just want to interrupt real quick here and say that what it struck me immediately when he was talking about having a beer in Kavanaugh's name is this is another opportunity for the right to celebrate. The right won. Okay? But too many times the right snatches despair out of the jaws of happiness. There's a lot of times in which you need to celebrate. When things go your way, you celebrate. Yay, things went my way. Trump got elected. Yay, Trump got elected. Take some time out and celebrate. Now, he was talking about he's hoping everybody at home celebrates. He needs to lead the way. He needs to take part of his broadcast, a segment of his broadcast, in this particular case, at least a segment, maybe two, maybe the entire broadcast, to dance on the Democrats' grave, to cheer and celebrate and have a good time and thumb his nose at all of the political opponents who tried to destroy a fine man. And not only should he do that, I should do that. And I was remiss, and I failed to go ahead and do that yesterday. When I did my podcast and noted that Kavanaugh had won, I could have taken the segment to cheer and go on and on about it. And I failed to do that. Shame on me. And I will do better next time. I will make sure that next time there is something to celebrate, that I actually go ahead and do celebrate it. But for Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, they go straight into more bad news. How did the Democrats react to this? Oh, the Democrats are pissed off again. And we go right back into that. We never get a break. That's part of the reason we want to celebrate, is take a break. We want to take a break. Take a good, big, deep breath. We fought hard. We were told to go out and call senators and do this, that, and the other thing. We fought hard. We won. We deserve a break. We earned a break. Okay, so now back to Rush Limbaugh's article. He goes on to talk about Nate Silver. Okay, so here we go. There's a part of me that wonders, and it's a very small part. I wonder if the Democrats at large ignore that and do not think that behavior is tied to them. They don't do anything to stop it. And in fact, they encourage it. Maxine Waters is out there encouraging it. Mazie Hirono. Did you hear what Mazie Hirono said? She said people are totally justified in harassing Republicans in public and in restaurants, even in their homes, and forcing them out because they're white racists. They're white supremacists. They're totally justified. So there's part of me that knows the Democrats are promoting this. There's another part who thinks some Democrats do not think that this deranged psychological upset is tied to them. Let me put it this way. If we have people on our side behaving like this, it would worry me to death. It would worry me to death that voters are going to think that conservatism is made up of deranged lunatics like this. The Democrats don't seem to be concerned about that at all. Okay, so a couple of things here. First of all, on the sort of the back end here, he comes really close to doing what he should do, which is to say, look at how the Democrats acted. They acted like fools. They acted like lunatics. And they acted like absolute idiots. And no self-respecting conservative, no self-respecting Republican would ever do such a thing, because we have too much class. And even beyond class, because we are realistic. We make the presumption for the status quo. We look at things from a logical standpoint. And as a matter of fact, as a matter of reality, everybody looks at things logically. Which brings me to my next point, that the Democrats are the biggest liars on the face of the earth. Okay, here, let's reread that one segment here. He says, totally justified in harassing Republicans in public, etc., because they're white racists. They're white supremacists. They're totally justified. No, they don't believe that for a second. Stop and think about it. Stop and think about it. If they truly believe that the people that they are in the House of Representatives with, that the people they are in government with were white racists, and they couldn't throw them out of office, why would they stick around? Why would they bother to stick around? They would resign on the spot. Okay, it's like the lady that I saw. There's a picture of a woman. She'd embroidered something. It was fascinating that she went ahead and embroidered this, but that white supremacism will stop when all white people are dead. Basically words to that effect, or when all white people have been killed. It was more of a murderous, or a what would you call it? Not eugenics, but when you're out killing people for their race and you're trying to exterminate an entire race, like a genocide. It was called genocide. Okay. But it was a white woman that was holding this sign. And my first thought was, then why haven't you killed yourself? And she's not going to. And we all know she's not going to. And all the people that are saying, well, white people are the problem, particularly white people, are liars. And we know they're liars because of how they act. There's a thing on the left where if you call somebody a liar, a particular person on the left, well, you don't know what I'm thinking. That's the response you'll get. Okay, don't be fooled by that. The proper response to that is, yes, I do. I damn well do know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking, and I know what you're feeling. And I do by how you act. Okay? If you come out and say that all white people should die, and the only hope for the entire planet and the universe is for all white people on the earth to be dead, and you're a white person and you haven't killed yourself yet, you're a liar. Period. So, when they come out and say, all of my colleagues are white supremacists, all my coworkers are white supremacists. All the people in the United States that are white supremacists. But you still live in the United States. You still work where you work. You haven't made any changes in your life. You haven't fled the country. Then you're a liar. This is what the Democrats do. They bluff. And the reason that they're bluffing is what they're really trying to do here is not demonstrate to people that the courage of their convictions. They're simply agitating. They're being agents provocateurs. They are trying to provoke the revolution. They're hoping that when they come out and say, oh, white people should be killed, that the white people are going to come running out of their houses and with torches and pitchforks to seek revenge on these folks and start riots, which will turn into a civil war, which will turn into a worldwide revolution, and socialist paradise will be the result. Okay. In other words, they say these things strictly for effect. They don't believe a sentence of it. Okay. So you have to keep that in mind. Don't for a minute think, well, they're deranged or they're psychotic or whatever. No, they're not. It's all an act. It's a put on. And again, it's done for effect. So don't be taken in by it. So let's see if there's anything else on the article. He goes on about seeing Nate Silver, Democrats. See on TV on the Democrat side, it's not going to fade away. Yeah, on the Democrat side, it's not going to fade away. I think everybody needs to know this. On the Democrat side, this deranged lunacy has become the defining characteristic of today's Democrat Party and the American left. You have to remember that these people have been off their rocker since November of 2016. But again, he's wrong because they're not off the rocker. They know what they're doing and why they're doing it. Now, the other problem here is part of the reason they get away with this is because of Republicans and conservatives. Republicans and conservatives, because these people will go out and say, all white people need to be dead, and then walk up to a conservative and say, hi, how you doing? Long time no see. How's the family? And shake their hand and pat them on the back and act like their friend. And the conservative, usually kind of dumbfounded, will just stand there and shake their hand and allow them to pat them on the back and make it look to the world like they're friends. They're not. Okay. One of the things that conservatives need to do is when you got people on the left or anywhere that talk like that, you have to turn your back on them. You have to. Okay. I know that's kind of tough to do sometimes. If it's a woman doing this, if it's a black person that's doing this, a Hispanic that's doing this, and they want to shake your hand, and you're afraid, I'm going to be called a racist. Well, if you shake their hand, you've already confirmed it. Either way. And again, remembering that they're going to do this for effect anyhow means that don't take it seriously. Okay? Turn your back on them. Somebody's going to talk like that, especially if these are people that are going to, because what they're looking basically to do by shaking your hand is they're getting rewarded. They're looking for a reward for doing what they did. But especially if it's on your property, your house. If your brothers or sisters, family, friends, whatever, wanted to, all white people should be dead, there's no reason to put up with that in your home. Ever. Anywhere on your, anything's your property, your car. Okay, that's when you need to start issuing ultimatums. Look, either you shut up with this kind of behavior or you can leave. Get out of the house. Get out of the car. Whatever the case is. You own a business, shut up about it, or you can find another job. Okay, because you are right to do so. It is that's a situation in which might is following right. Okay, so but even in public, now there may be times in which you may find yourself it's just too much pressure not to acknowledge this person in some way, shape, or form. You're at a club meeting of some sort or whatever, and you're concerned that this person is going to make a big deal out of things and make the social situation very uncomfortable for you. Well, even then, I would say, if this person is a member of the club in good standing and they're demanding genocide, then the question, you need to go and say to the club that this person needs to be expelled. And the club needs to make a choice. Either you pick her or I leave and put them on the spot. Why stay in a club that's going to accept that kind of behavior? Okay. So because underneath it all, what the left is saying is the ends justify the means and might makes right. And it doesn't. But if you put up with it, you're validating it, and you're just as bad as the person on the left. Okay, when we come back, we're going to be talking about René Descartes from one of the book called The 10 Books That Screwed Up the World. And thank you very much. Let's see where it is. There it is. Okay, Chapter 2, Discourse on Method, from 1637. It's amazing when you think about it, because his ideas are still in use. His mistakes, the mistakes that he's made, are still being made today, some over 400 years later. Well, almost 400 years. It would be over 300 years. 370, 380 years later, the mistakes that this guy made still are being made today. That's the kind of influence that he had, unfortunately. Now, one of the things I want to say before I get into the chapter is that my issue with Descartes was that he took all of his main issue was with Thomism, which is St. Thomas Aquinas, or Aquinas, who was a philosopher in the Middle Ages, and was a founder of the scholastic school of philosophy. So, and he relies heavily, St. Thomas does, on Aristotle for a lot of his ideas and whatnot. A lot of what St. Thomas was doing was trying to differentiate between what is logical, what is philosophical, and what is theological. Where does faith enter the equation when you get into philosophy? In the old saying is, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, render unto God what is God's. Well, that was what he was trying to figure out. What is it that belongs to God, and what is it belongs to Caesar, for example. So, anyways, back to Descartes. He took all 2,000 years worth of intellectual history, Aristotle and all the people that came after Aristotle that helped to shape and mold philosophy, and he threw it in the trash. He basically said it's too restrictive, and so he decided that we should start over again. And so now we have people today, sometimes lay people, a lot of times philosophers, that do exactly the same thing. And they do it by asking a question, usually in the form of, what do we do? Okay, and the first question that has to be asked to answer the question, what do we do, is, what have we been doing? That's where you start. You start with the status quo. What have we been doing? Or in the case of thinking, what do we think? How do we know? You start with the status quo. How do we know? We know by the evidence, ultimately by the evidence of our senses. And then what do we think? What have we been thinking? So, anyhow, Chapter 2, Discourse on Method. I reject as absolutely false everything in which I could imagine the least doubt. René Descartes, 1596 to 1650. How grateful would you be if you came to me complaining of a headache and I chopped off your head? Certainly I fixed the problem, and permanently so, but at a rather high cost than you'd hoped for. René Descartes' Discourse on Method has a similar effect on the Western mind. Descartes' little book has done damage to us precisely by seeming to do good, like a bull who kindly offers to straighten up the china shop. Descartes attacked skepticism, but only by denying reality. He confirmed the idea of the immaterial soul against the pronouncements of the crass materialists of the day, but only by recreating us as insubstantial ghosts trapped in clattering machines. He proved God's existence, but only by making it depend on our thinking him into existence. By his good intentions, if indeed they really were good, he fathered every flavor of self-congratulatory solipsism, led us to believe that we are no different from robots, and made religion a creation of our own ego. Thanks a lot, Renee. If we take Descartes at his word, he was seeking a way around the snarling skeptics of his day. Skepticism is a kind of intellectual disease that generally arises among people who are both well-fed and well-read. Nobody who is truly hungry worries about whether it is possible to know whether the steaming hamburger in front of him is real. In fact, ordinary people working under quite natural conditions are not bothered by skepticism at all. Imagine a farmer wandering around lost in his own thoughts, vexed by the question of whether he can really know what a cow is. He's too immersed in reality to question it. The cow needs to be milked, and there's no time for utter confusion. One could wish that Descartes had a cow staring at him impatiently. I say this not because it is a bad idea to refute skeptics. That is one very good service philosophers can do for farmers, but because it is a very bad idea to do it with a cure that's worse than the disease. Good intentions can make for bad medicine. Descartes begins the discourses on method with a joke. Good sense, he tells us, is the most evenly distributed commodity in the world. For each of us considers himself to be so well endowed therewith that even those who are the most difficult to please in all other matters are not wont to desire more of it than they have. In short, everyone is satisfied with his own opinions and thinks anyone who doesn't agree a fool. This would be quite harmless if human beings merely disagreed about the best flavor of ice cream or other matters of mere taste. But each has his or her own opinion about the deepest and greatest questions as well. Whether God exists, and if he does, what he demands of us. What actions are good or evil, moral or immoral, noble or base, fair or foul. What political party should be voted in, and what should be done by the winning party. If you doubt the bite of Descartes' little joke, then look around during an election year. We have two political parties, each of which can barely suppress disagreements among its own members long enough to oppose the other. Abortion, prayer in school, homosexual marriage, federal subsidies, welfare, war. During an election year, the well-worn adage, talk about anything but religion, morality, and politics, is cast aside so we can talk about nothing but. The resulting acrimonious cacophony reminds us of the wisdom of having presidential elections only every 4 years. The fact that we all disagree about so many things makes us skeptical that we can know anything at all. If we could really know the truth about something, then it would seem that people couldn't disagree about it. Maybe it's all a matter of mere opinion after all. Maybe the skeptics are right. This skepticism is what Descartes meant to cure. He offered a method as medicine, pretending with false modesty that he wasn't really saying that everyone should follow his method, but merely describing what method had worked for him. This false modesty hid a gargantuan pride. Descartes desired nothing less than everyone should follow his method, and his wish has been all too handsomely fulfilled. He is known, and rightfully and woefully so, as the father of modern philosophy. If you think that doesn't pertain to you, the great Frenchman Alexis de Tocqueville said after his visit to America in the first half of the 19th century that America is one of the countries where the precepts of Descartes are least studied and are best applied. I leave it to discerning readers of de Tocqueville's Democracy in America to determine whether that was a compliment. But his point was that Descartes' philosophical method had somehow seeped into our souls and become second nature. What then is Descartes' method? Simply put, doubt everything. In order to conquer skepticism, Descartes proposed that we be skeptical about everything to see if there's anything left we can't be skeptical about. I thought it necessary, he tells us in part 4 of the discourse, quote, that I reject as absolutely false everything in which I could imagine the least doubt, so as to see whether, after this process, anything in my set of beliefs remains that is entirely indubitable. Unquote. before we jump on, well, let's try that again. Before we jump on Descartes' bandwagon, we should ask the most obvious question. Isn't this a rather doubtful process? What if we took it the other way around? Should we accept as absolutely true everything in which we can discern the least grain of certainty? Why would this be any less rational than rejecting everything in which we can imagine the least bit of doubt? It is possible to imagine the tree I am about to walk into is not solid at all, but actually made of mist. After caroming off of it, I might have other ideas. But such a method would seem to be madness, and it soon gets even madder. A good recipe for insanity is this: that I reject as absolutely false everything in which I could imagine the least doubt. If we can let our imaginations run wild, we could doubt even the solidity of the ground we stand on, or the fact that we have a nose. Even if such a method doesn't lead to insanity, it certainly leads to narcissism, the morbid condition of believing that I sit in godlike judgment of everything else, but nothing stands in judgment of me. We suspect that Descartes' method clothes itself in the most abject humility as a way to exert the most naked pride. It assumes the posture of a quivering ant to presume the imposture of a towering god. But before we get carried away in criticizing his method, we ought to follow it out. What does Descartes say must be doubted? First, all wisdom from the past, whether it be found in books or in tradition. The past has nothing to teach Descartes. Why? Because there is disagreement, and disagreement must mean an absence of wisdom. I'm going to go ahead and stop there. I think it's an appropriate place because he touches on the very thing I was talking about, where Descartes took 2,000 years of intellectual history and threw it in the garbage. And that's one of the things that philosophers and non-philosophers have learned ever since. And that's where you hear from a lot of people, lay people. Well, what do we do about X? Well, what have we been doing about X? What do we do about pollution? What have we been doing about it? What do we do about poverty? What have we been doing about it? Because a lot of times they like to be able to come out and say, hey, I got this new idea. And it's not a new idea at all. It's an old idea that's been proposed and rejected, that has been tried and found to be wanting to find that it doesn't work. And so we end up going in circles, doing the same things over and over again. Another way of putting it is learning by hitting every pothole in the road. And not only that, but you have to hit the same potholes in the road every single day, because every day you get up is a new day. We don't know if those potholes are still there until we hit them. Okay, basically Descartes' talking about we got to learn everything the hard way, and we don't. And also I wanted to bring up real quick, he talks, the key to the flaw in his thinking is anything that I can imagine to be an objection to the certainty or a doubt, even any doubt that I can imagine. The imaginary versus the reality, versus reality. So he is trying to measure reality by using unreality, i.e. imagination. Doesn't work. If you're going to measure something in reality, you have to use a valid, real measuring stick. Might be a yardstick, a ruler, whatever. But that's the way you would measure reality, is with something that is real. And that concludes another episode of The Drill. And I thank you for listening. And until next time, have a great day.